Now let's use the UV image editor to precisely align a bitmap to an object. Now we already touched on this editor a little bit in taking a bitmap image and just showing it in the viewport, but we also can use it to precisely map the image to the object. So let's go ahead and select this object here and go over to the materials panel, add a new material, just hit that plus sign. And then let's go to the textures panel, and you'll see we have no textures either. So I'm just go ahead and hit plus, add in a texture. On this type, we're going to add image or movie, and then we're going to go down to our image and click open. And we're going to hit cardboard box, which is the image that we're using. And you can see now we have that cardboard box image. Now if we hit F12 to render, you'll see that, well, it's not mapping properly. And part of that is because we just don't have our mapping coordinates set to UV. So let's go ahead and set those to UV. And let's take a look at both here. And let's go ahead and do another render. And you can see it's still not right. So let's go ahead and start mapping this image to the box. So what we need to do is open up a UV image editor. Now I need this open at the same time as my viewport. So probably the easiest thing to do is to just left click up here and drag over another window and then change this one on the left to the UV image editor. Now what this does is it shows an image, and then what I can do is I can map this object against that image. Now we did this before, so let's go ahead and just do the basics here. In our user perspective viewport, we're going to hit tab and we're going to go into face mode and hit A to select all faces. Now in here, we're just going to go ahead and open up the image that we want. We're going to go into our Chapter 7 folder and open up Cardboard Box. Now when I do that, you can see how when I'm in textured mode now, that shows up. So you can see that I have that image of the box mapped one to each face. Well, that's not really what I want. I really want to match the unfolding of this box to this image. And you can notice how this image is basically just a box that's been unfolded and laid flat. Now this UV image editor, if I expand it, you can see how it has a number of controls here. Now probably the most important ones are down here. This allows us to basically select edges, faces, and vertices. So if I were to select faces here, what I'm doing is I'm selecting the faces that are on this object. So if in here, in this UV editor window, if I hit G for grab, I can move that face, and you can kind of see how I have all of these faces connected. In fact, if you see here, you can see how as I move that face, it changes the mapping on the object. So what we have here is basically a way to match the faces on this object to the flat image map. But the easiest way to do this is to unfold my box. In order to do that, I need to create some seams. And I can do that by going into edge mode. So I'm going to hit Control Tab, go Edge, and then start selecting the edges that I want. Now if we look at this image, you'll see that we have 3 panels connected here, and then the top panel is also connected. So what I want to do is select those 3 panels here. So I want 1, 2, 3. These are edges. So in other words, that's this edge here. Swivel over to the other side and then shift right click to select these edges. So now that I have all of these edges selected, I need to define them as the seam. So we go into Mesh, Edges, Mark Seam. And when I do that, notice how they turn red. And that shows me this is how this object will unwrap. So anything that's not red will be continuous. Anything that is red is one of these seams. So now that I have that, I can go into face mode, select all of my faces, and unwrap it. So I'm going to select Mesh, UV Unwrap. Notice how we have a lot of options here, but I just want to pick this top one called Unwrap, which recognizes those seams and unwraps the object. And as soon as I do that, notice how this interface here changes. What we have now is the faces of this object are now unwrapped according to those seams, and it actually looks pretty close. So what we can do here is go through our UV editor and align those so that it lines up. So what I can do is I can actually select faces, edges, or vertices here. And so if I want, I can select each one of these faces individually. And in order to move them, I just use the keyboard shortcuts, G for grab. So if I want, I can select those faces. I can select this face here, hit G for grab, and move it. And notice how it's moving in that right user perspective viewport. Now if I want, I can select all of them. So all I have to do is hit A, and that selects all of these. And if I hit G for grab, that means I can move these. And you can see how now my bitmap, as I dial this in, it's starting to line up. So I'm going to go ahead and try and position this fairly accurately. And now what I can do is I can go in and fine tune it. So if you can see here, I've got it actually pretty close here. I've got my box pretty much lined up. It seems like the bottom seam though isn't quite working, but we can fix that. So let's go ahead and navigate over to here and just select this face here, hit G to grab, and just move it down a little bit. Now if I want to, I could actually go through a face at a time, an edge at a time. Same commands for this as it is for regular viewport. Basically, I select an edge. You can just right click to select those edge, G to move it if I want, or if I want, I can align it however I want. So again, if I want to select this edge here and hit G to grab and move, you can see how I'm aligning this. Notice the top of that box. I can totally change how this bitmap maps to my object. So let's go ahead and select some vertices here. Again, it's just right click, G for grab, and we can move those around. Now you also have other commands besides grab. You can certainly scale. You can certainly rotate as well. So for example, if I were to go into face mode here, select a face, I could G grab and move it, or I could hit R to rotate it, or I could hit S to scale it. Okay, so you have a lot of different options here. So those are some of the basics of how to use this UV editor. Now when I hit render, you can see how this pretty much lines up. And this is how we assign those UV coordinates that we're using in that textures panel. So when I go over here to textures and I say the coordinates are UV, this is where it's pulling it from. So now once we have these assigned, we can use this bitmap and it will map perfectly.